Thanks, Jim.
You're very welcome.
Hey guys, it's Jake here again and welcome back to my channel. Today I am so happy because I have finally passed my practical driving test here in the UK. So for today's video, I am going to share to you exactly what happened from my preparation to the actual exam day, what driving maneuvers I have to do, what was my tell me and show me question, and what happened at the end of the exam. So this is actually my second take, and I'm not ashamed to say that that first attempt was charged to experience, and from that I actually learned the level of standard that the DVSA has for those doing the exam. So for that first exam, I wasn't 100% ready, and even my instructor said it would be best to actually postpone it a little bit. But then during that time, I was actually going to the Philippines. So I wanted to pass the driving exam, have my license, and be able to drive when I was in the Philippines. So that's why I managed to convince him to let me take the test, because I had sort of above average level at that time, but it wasn't like a super passing level yet. So in terms of preparation, my last driving lesson was last Friday, which was 5 days ago. We had a 2 hours full lesson and we covered all the 5 maneuvers and had a general driving to make sure that everything was still smooth. And by the end of that lesson, my instructor was happy enough to let me take the exam. Looking back to my first attempt, that was a completely different level. I have advanced now after a few months and I was ready to take the exam. So the night before the exam, I made sure that I slept early, at least have 8 hours of sleep. And when I woke up this morning, I made sure I had coffee at least 1 hour before the exam. Because if I drank coffee closer to the exam time, I would have a bit of palpitation. Perhaps my hands would be a bit shaky. One thing that I learned from the previous exam was that, so I drove from our house to Letchworth Driving Test Centre, which is about 30 to 40 minutes away. And by the time we reached Letchworth itself, I was kind of slightly tired already. So when I had the exam, I was actually already driving for about an hour and 15 minutes already. So by the time I took the exam, my arms were tired and I was slightly exhausted. So for today's exam, I asked my instructor, this is just to prevent me from being tired before the exam. Do you mind if you drive to Letchworth, and once we get there, I will start driving once we get into Letchworth itself. So we did that today, and by the time I arrived, I had about 30 to 40 minutes of practice drive before the actual exam. On the day of the exam, make sure you bring your provisional driver's license, because they will check that before the start of your exam. So this is how the exam went. So 5 minutes before the exam, we were sat down in the waiting area. Then one by one, these DVSA examiners would come into the room and ask for a person. So once the examiner called my name, we went out and he asked me to show my provisional driver's license, which I did. And then he asked me to sign on the iPad that I was the one taking the test. After that, we went out of the test center and we walked into the road, and he asked me to read a car number plate, which is about 20 meters away, which I managed to read properly. And then he told me to get into the car, but do not start the engine yet. So whilst he was doing a look around the car and doing his thing on the iPad, I got into the car. Then I put on my seat belt and just made sure everything was okay. When he entered the car, he said that the first 20 minutes is going to be independent driving. You will be following the sat-nav, and after that, I will be directing you as to where to go. And so we began. Once we were out of the driving test center, we went straight into a road that was going downhill. This is directly opposite Jackman's place. That downhill road was very tight because there were cars parked on each lane. So I just made sure that I was going slowly, even though it's a 30. I made sure that I was going moderately slow, and always to look at the end of the road to see if any car was coming so that I could adjust. Before I could continue down the road, he asked me to pull on the left side, which I did, making sure that I had the signals. After I've pulled over, make sure I put it to park and activated my handbrake. So then he told me to continue, so I made sure that I did my 6-point check, do the signal, make sure you check your blind spot, and then continue driving. At the end of the road, that's where some examinees fail, because it's not a straightforward T-junction, there's like a hidden part, so you really have to peep and make sure that there's no car coming from both sides before turning right. So as soon as I turned right, he said, we will now start the sat-nav. And then he clicked the tom-tom, and that's when it started. So basically, I just followed the sat-nav. There were a lot of tricky turns where it is not a straightforward 90-degree left or right turn. There were a few right turns that was almost like a V. So you had to do it slowly and make sure you were in control of the steering. And about halfway through following the sat-nav, he asked me to pull up to one side, and then he told me that I want you to do a parallel parking right behind this black car. And I was like, oh my goodness. Because parallel parking is the one that I find to be the most difficult, because there's a lot of maneuvers to do. But I knew what to do, so I just stayed calm, followed everything step by step in my mind. So I just waited. There were 2 cars that were still going fast. So I waited for them to finish. Then I started to go towards the right side of the parked car. Once I was there, I changed to reverse, make sure that my left signal light was on, and then I slowly did the maneuver. So I did get a minor for this one, but I managed to complete the maneuver successfully, and the minor was for not looking enough times to the back, to the rear view mirror, to the actual blind spot. So you really have to do all of those turns, but I did it safely. There was no oncoming cars, and then I was able to do it properly within, I think it was even 3/4 car length away from the parked car. So that was all done correctly. So you have at least 2 cars length away to do your parallel parking. So that was fine. I managed to pass that even with a minor. After 5 minutes, he asked me again to pull up on the left side, and then he said, we are going to do an emergency stop maneuver. I need you to stop whenever I say stop and do this. Before you even take the test, you would have practiced that anyway. So I made my way, and then about 1 or 2 minutes after he checked that it was safe, he then said, stop. And I was just like, with all my might, I just pushed the brake as fast as I could. And considering that's what you need to do, it shouldn't be slow. It shouldn't be a slow stop, because this is simulating a situation where you really have to stop right then and there to avoid collision. So it was just a very, very firm stop. Actually, my coat and everything that was on the seat and the back seat just fell forward, fell off the seat. But that's what they want to see, that you can just stop as quickly as you can, safely. And I managed to do that. And then he says, I will not ask you to do that again. Please continue driving. And so yeah, I continued, making sure I still did all the observations and make a signal, because we were already on the right side of the road. I signaled left to go back on the left lane. And that's it for the emergency stop. So a few minutes later, following the sat-nav was completed. So he said, just follow the road ahead. Unless I say otherwise, I will give you a warning way ahead of time before your turn. So I kind of noticed that we were on our way back to the exam center. And I was thinking, yes, we did not pass through that road with a lot of road humps. And as soon as I thought that, when we turned left, there it was. I had to pass through like 4 road humps. And this is one of the things which I failed before because I was going through the hump very slow, and the examiner on my first take said that it might have been too slow, that the car behind me would have stopped in order to avoid collision. And so, good thing there was no car behind me, and today it was so much smoother. We've had a lot of practice with this one, and on the first bump it was a bit jumpy, but I made sure that I wasn't too slow, that I'd stop the car behind me, and I made sure to look at the rear view mirror just to make sure that no one is behind me, and then continued. For my second, third, and fourth speed humps, miraculously I managed to go on the exact center of it, and it felt like there was no hump at all. So it was perfect. It was so perfect. Thank you so much, Lord. So on the last 5 minutes back to the exam center, I noticed that the examiner was quite relaxed now. Hand was outside the car through the window, and he was looking out. He wasn't even looking at me. So I was like, does this mean I pass? But then I said, no, concentrate. Anything can happen in the last 5 minutes of your exam. So I just said, concentrate, don't think about that. And so I just made sure I continued to drive safely. And when we reached the exam center, he said, just do a forward bay parking on any of those bays. And I was trying to do a perfect one within the line. And he said, just don't mind the lines, just go to the bay. And I had a sudden, my heart stopped basically, because this happened the last time with the lady examiner. And when she said this, there was a tone like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It was actually, it doesn't matter because I had failed that first take. So this time when he said, don't mind the lines, just go do a forward bay parking, I was also like, oh no, why doesn't the line matter? Does that mean I failed again? My tell me question was actually how to check the tire pressure. So if you watch the DVSA video on YouTube, fairly straightforward. I basically memorized all the answers, and I just said the exact words, and he was like, that's a good answer. Okay, and my show me question, I was so lucky today. Even though I've mastered all the show me tasks, I was lucky because I got the horn. So he was like, when it's safe, can you show me how you'd operate your horn? I was just like, oh yes, I can. And that's it. And I continued driving. So when I finished the bay parking, I was really nervous. He started to say a few words which didn't make sense on those first 5 seconds. And then I heard the word pass. And I was like, I pass? And I was like, yes. And I was like, yes. And then my examiner came from the building to the car, and he saw me from outside with the windows closed. And then when he opened the car, he said, judging by your expression, I think you passed. I was like, yes, Jim. Yes, I passed. And yeah, so then the examiner took out this pad of paper which had the practical driving test pass certificate, and then he asked for my provisional driving license, started writing the details, and then he said, would you like me to keep this provisional license so that I can apply for the professional driving license for you? It will be sent straight to you between the next 3 to 5 days. And I said, oh, you can just do it yourself. Okay, yeah, sure. And that was it. I was so happy. The examiner was smiling as well from my reaction, and my instructor, Jim, was happy. And yeah, and that's where, after that, I said, Jim, let's take a photo. And yeah, so he took a photo from his phone. He was going to upload it to his driving association's Facebook, and of course I had to do mine so that I could post it as well. And yeah, that is the driving test. So apparently, after the test, most instructors do not allow their candidates to drive back, whether they've passed or they failed. because the emotions, might be in extremes and it may tamper with your driving skills. If you're too happy, you may become a bit careless or going too fast, or if you fail, you might be so sad that you're not observing properly. So instructors mostly drive the examinees on the way home, which I am happy to comply with because I was just so happy and I just wanted to relax on the way home. So here's a few tips that I'm going to share to you, which I've learned over the last 30 plus hours of driving lessons. So the first one is trust your driving instructor when he says you are not ready, because they've got years of experience. They are not milking you for money. They've got a lot of people lined up. Anyway, even if you pass the test today, there will always be people wanting to do lessons. So when they say you are not ready, that definitely means you are not ready. Next tip is find an instructor that goes well with your personality. So Jim is actually my second driving instructor. So with the first one, I did a block booking of 10 hours plus an additional 2 sessions, so additional 2 hours. And as a beginner learner with no driving experience at all, it wasn't the best initial learning experience. There were times when he was raising his voice and he looked angry. And as a beginner learner at that time, if somebody gets angry right beside me and shouts, everything just goes off. Like I lose concentration, and the next few minutes I won't be able to drive properly. So I was actually deciding to switch over, and then my working schedule changed, so I could only do weekends. So that was actually a good thing, because that was my reason. I didn't want to say, oh, I'm moving to another instructor because you're a bit shouty or a bit emotional as an instructor. So I didn't say that. So I said that I'm working Monday to Fridays straight now, so I can only do weekends, which he couldn't. So I had to find a different instructor, and I was really, really lucky to find Jim. And I just found his name really on the DVSA list online within our area, and I was lucky to get a slot with him. And even on our first session, there was so much difference. A very calm instructor and very thorough, and just a kind person in general. And that really suited me well, because if I made a mistake, fine, tell me what the mistake was, let me learn from it, but do not shout at me. So that is very important. Next tip is drive defensively. So if you feel like you can't pass through with the very narrow road, even if it's 2 lanes, just stop, let the car pass through, and then when it's clear, go. And if you are doing roundabouts, always take your time, just do it slowly, and don't rush. Even if you see in the rearview mirror there's a car very close to you, just let him be. It's his job to slow down because he's the one behind you. He should not be rushing you. Just do your maneuver and then just, do it slowly, okay? Next is watch your speed. It's very common for first takers to overspeed. Even if it's 1 mph above the speed limit, that will still be a fault. So if the speed limit was 30, you'd go between 25 to 28. What I find effective is as soon as I see that it reaches 29, I would just slow down, because you won't notice it, especially when you're going downhill. Just goes to 30, 31 straight away because of gravity and all that. So as soon as it hits 29, I just do a little bit of brake, just a little bit, just to slow it down by 1 mph. Next tip is do your lessons in the actual area of your driving test center and its surrounding towns. So for me today, I was doing the test at Letchworth, but we actually went to Baldock, okay, which is just a town beside it. On my previous exam, we went out to Stotford, which has a 20 miles per hour limit all throughout. So it's good to practice on the actual city you're doing the test in and also the surrounding areas, because you will actually be going out, driving out of that city or town. Next is to master all your maneuvers. That's forward bay parking, reverse bay parking, parallel parking, pulling up on the right, and your emergency stop. You make sure you know all 5 of them, you've practiced them, because any one of them, or even 2, including the emergency stop, could be a part of your test. Next tip, if you are to choose between 1 hour or 2 hour lessons, always go for the 2 hour lessons. Even though you are paying more, this is actually from experience, because on my first instructor, I had 1 hour lessons and it kind of felt like it was too quick, and you've barely started, you've learned a little bit of something, but you don't have enough time to practice it on the same day, so you don't retain it that much. So when I moved over to Jim, he himself said it's better to always have 2 hour lessons, not just because of the journey towards the driving test center area, which is far from my place, but also because you get to practice more. And last tip, this is probably easier said than done, but you have to really try and be calm. You can't drive when you are too nervous. It's just not gonna work. So whatever your style is, whether you have a good night's sleep, whether you don't drink coffee, or you listen to music an hour before, or have conversation or whatever, just do whatever works for you to make sure that when you start your exam, you are actually calm and relaxed. Okay? And if you make a mistake and you know that you've done one, just let it go. Continue with your observations, continue driving safely. Do not let that one mistake affect the rest of your exam. Okay? Because you are actually allowed, this is according to my instructor, up to 15 minors, and you can still pass. That is, of course, a situation dependent, but if you've done very small errors which doesn't endanger anyone, doesn't cause anyone to break, doesn't cause any collision, up to 15, you may still pass the exam. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to give it a like and share it to your friends who will be taking the exam soon. And I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel for more informational videos. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a nice day. Drive safe. Bye-bye.